Hello, everyone, and welcome to LTR Edition 20. As you know, LTR stands for Love, Technology, and Relationships. And we're all about bringing the dating and online social community industries together so that you can learn about each other's businesses, learn about technology, and hopefully grow. Today we have two speakers for you. The first is Professor Paul Dolan, and Professor Dolan is a professor at London School of Economics for the last 13 years. He's got 120 peer-reviewed papers, no less, with 31,000 citations. He's also an author of a book which I do highly recommend you read because I think it's very relevant to us. He's author of a book called Happiness by Design, and the follow-on book is Happy Ever After. He's also hosted Love Island, by the way, and he's the director of the Executive MSc in Behavioural Science at London School of Economics, which is a course that I've done. I highly recommend. If you want to really get your head around behavioural science, this is the course to do. Right, so we're doing a subject basically about how you can work with academics, what the benefits are, and Paul's going to give us a walkthrough of that. So I'm going to bow out. I do recommend for this presentation for this discussion that is very much a discussion. Paul's going to talk for about 12 minutes, and then we need to go into an open discussion because this is something we really need to do a kind of a two-way discussion on. So please put your questions into the Q&A section. Then you can vote those questions up, and then I'll ask those so that I can make life a bit easier for Paul. I'll bubble those questions up and ask them. So here we go, Paul. The floor is yours. I'll bow out. Thank you very much for coming to speak with us. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers, Mark. Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. So yeah, I've got 17 minutes. I need to leave at 10 to 6 UK time, so I'll try and talk for about half that time, and then maybe we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So where to start? I mean, as I was saying in one of the tables, one of the things that academics are interested in is, or many academics, not every single discipline, but certainly in economics and psychology in particular, which is the interface where my work sits, we're interested in trying to establish causal effects of interventions, of things that change in our lives and so on, rather than correlations. We want to know whether, if you pull the lever and A moves, that it leads to B. And the ideal way to do that with human behavior is to observe the human animal in its natural environment, where you tweak them in some particular way and you look at the causal effects of that tweak on their behavior. It's kind of like a David Attenborough approach to understanding behavior. He goes out and observes animals in the wild, ideally without them knowing that they've got the camera crew there. He doesn't sit tigers down in a focus group and ask them what they're going to do when they see the antelope. There's all sorts of reasons why you can get spurious answers from surveys or from asking people about their intentions. Ideally, we want to observe the human animal in its natural environment, and ideally without them knowing that they're being watched. And so that's kind of most of the work in behavioural science is in one way or another trying to establish those causal effects. And that can be quite tricky. And I think it's particularly tricky in the dating industry because we want to watch people and we want to manipulate them. And it's the manipulating piece that I think is particularly challenging. Sometimes we might want to, in our academic research, manipulate bits of a person's profile in order to see what effect that has on a number of people liking them, what number of people wanting to date them, and so on. And of course, that raises a whole range of ethical concerns for the dating apps and dating industry, because you don't want fake profiles on your sites. So that's actually one thing that is actually, I think, worthy of discussion and exploration in our work, is thinking about, we have a particular project in mind. I've got one of my PhD students with us on this session today, Yara, who we're interested in polarization and the extent to which people are sorting. And so they're choosing people to date who have a very similar set of attitudes, and their beliefs are very similar around politics and other issues of the day, and whether and to what extent people are sorting much more than they might have done, in the past, say, and maybe much more than they would have done pre-dating apps, when some of that information might not have been readily available to people. You might find out only after a few weeks or months what policies or parties they would be willing to vote for. we'd like to establish the causal effects of that. We'd like to know whether polarization leads people to choose to sort, and by how much, and their willingness to trade off whether someone has similar views to them against other attributes that they might value, like education or income or height, or physical attractiveness. And to do that, ideally, we would want to tweak something about the profiles in order to establish those causal effects. Hopefully some of that insight would be interesting to dating industry, to dating apps, but finding ways in which we can do the research in ways that would be considered acceptable and ethical to the industry is a challenge. So as I say, it'd be really interesting to explore that. But more broadly, I think there's a whole range of opportunities that present themselves to academics working with industry and industry working with academics. We see across behavioural science, which has been burgeoning over the last couple of decades. Mark alluded to me being at LSE since 2010. I've been there 13 years. I think, well, I know when I joined, I was the only professor of behavioural science that the institution had. I was the first one that they'd hired. Since then, I've created the Department of Psychological and Behavioural Science. We now have programs, exec programs that Mark was on, full-time master's programs that we run. We have 80 full-time students this last year, 50 on our exec program. We have an alumni on our exec program that now runs into the hundreds because it's been running since 2014. We have an undergraduate program, and I don't know, we have like a dozen or so hires that I've made in the time that I've been at LSE and was head of department. And we're seeing so much collaboration taking place between academia and industry over the last decade or two, particularly in health, finance, marketing. They're very big areas. I mean, it's hard to actually think of any banks currently that don't employ a raft of behavioural scientists in one way or another, or heavily consult and collaborate with academics. I see it a lot in areas of public policy. I've spent a lot of time working in areas such as health and environment, and the relationship between academics and the dating industry is less. I mean, we see less peer-reviewed papers coming through into our journals, the top journals that we read from the dating industry, and it's interesting to think about why. Maybe some of those may have to do with the ethical challenges. I'm not entirely convinced that is the case. I think much of academia is kind of slow on the uptake, and maybe is kind of not been a bit behind the curve in how much and how significant dating apps, online activity in relation to finding partners of one kind or another has moved so rapidly in the last decade. And I think maybe we're a little bit slow in catching up in that. I think that might play some part in it. I think there may be some potential resistance amongst some academics to get involved in a more kind of subjective, more emotional area or set of activities, I guess. I mean, there'll be a lot of people who kind of are more wedded to a more traditional approach of understanding behavior through a more cognitive lens. But of course, a lot of dating is an emotional relationship of in terms of people finding the date, and also, of course, when they're with them. So I think a lot of those barriers are ones that we have significant potential opportunity to break down, because I think in my experience of a long time working with partners in industry across a whole range of sectors, there's a nice healthy tension between the industry wanting to know what works. That's really all you're interested in, whatever your objectives are. How can we achieve them more effectively? With academics wanting to establish some of these causal mechanisms, want to understand more about mechanisms about why things work and not just whether they do or not. And I think that's quite a nice healthy tension. I'd like to find ways in which we can work together more, industry and academics, in the area of dating, to understand more about the causal factors. And as I say, particularly in the case currently that we're particularly interested in understanding the causal effects of becoming more polarized. So that was about 7 or 8 minutes, which is about half the time that I have left with you until 10 to 6. So thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you very much, Mark. And I hope some of that resonated with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. And I've got a few questions for you that have come through. And the first one is from Christian Mercer from Positive Plus One. He asks, how do you propose to observe people within the dating and social industry? And let me just write back at you to the group as like, how are you able to enable Paul to observe your users and survey them? If you wouldn't mind just actually typing into the discussion area what you're willing to do, like how you can open up survey capability and behavioral observation capability. And what else do you need, Paul? What else can we do here?
Well, I mean, access to data is clearly, a key consideration. I mean, we want to, ideally want to be able to observe what's going on these apps in ways that, remain anonymous and, satisfy ethical standards, both of academia and of the industry. So that's a relatively easy ask. I mean, we can kind of do that, with the partners in whatever ways were mutually beneficial. I think it's establishing these causal effects of these particular tweaks that we might like to make. That's the really challenging bit. That, like we want to, say we wanted to put on to follow through further with the example of the polarization issue. We wanted to add to some profiles, either existing ones or creating new ones, that made very clear which party or parties people were in favor of or against, to see, controlling for everything else, what effect that particular dimension or attribute had on people's dating preferences, the willingness to want to date someone, for example, who expressed a particular political view. How could we do that in a way that would manipulate that characteristic and at the same time be trusted as being a profile on that platform? Or would we feed back afterwards to people, actually there was some, it's a tricky one, isn't it, about how you'd do that in a way that was acceptable to the apps and to the users of them? Because I wouldn't want to go on a date if I were dating. If I want to go on a dating app where I'm aware that there's at least some fraction, even though it's tiny, of profiles that were on that site that weren't real in some way, or that were being manipulated in some form or another.
How many profiles do you need?
I don't know, Yara, how many do we want? 20 or so, wasn't it?
20 profiles. So here's the ask. I was like, is it possible to have 20 profiles added onto your app, which look real, but are actually for a study? What is the appropriate treatment? So right back at you. If you could put in the comments, what is the appropriate treatment for this scenario? And I'll look at the comments and I'll bub up some of your responses.
What we do, just to say, what we do in research, like, because this is not an unusual thing to do, to manipulate people in ways that are not entirely real. What we do in other studies, in all of our research, actually, in order to comply with the ethical requirements that LSE and other universities stipulate, is to then tell people after the fact,
great,
that this is what we've done, and then to get them to consent to us using their data. I mean, people always actually do. I mean, rarely does anyone say, I don't want you using my data, because they kind of get why you've done the study. Or they get why you would want to use their data in an anonymized fashion. And so I wonder whether that would be, in all the experiments that we do in the lab, where we might manipulate people. We do studies where we observe people coming out of the lab where they think the study's over, and what we're really interested in what they're doing when they leave, but they don't know that we're still watching them once they've left. Again, consistent with the idea of you only really understand human behavior when you can observe it without people knowing, because we know that we behave differently. All of us behave differently. You know that, we all do, when we're being watched. And so to kind of observe people without them being watched, without them knowing they're being watched, is the kind of gold standard. So what we'll do then is we'll say to them, look, we've actually been watching you. Is it okay if we use this data? And that's the way we overcome those ethical hurdles.
Great. And you know, this is very much part and parcel with the nature of behavioral science. Is it's not enough to just ask, you've got to observe and look at the behavior. It's behavioral science. So it's not enough to just really survey. We need to look at how things change after a particular change has been made. I've got another question for you from Ben Goodman from City Swoon. He asked, besides politics, what criteria do you find people are sorting by? Horoscope, religion, ethnicity?
It's a super question. It's a super question, and I don't feel that we have sufficiently good causal evidence. We know that all of those things will matter to some degree, but knowing the exchange rate between them, right? You know, knowing how much one is worth relative to another is for us the open question. It's establishing in the language of an economist, the marginal rate of substitution, i.e., the exchange rate. How much of, how much is a horoscope difference worth as compared to a political party, as compared to all the other things that Ben just mentioned, alongside the standard attributes that people value, like attractiveness and height and income and education, and all the things that we know that you already all know from your own experiences and others working in the industry.
Great. And one last question from Brad Jones from Meet Kingsters. What specific way do academics wish to engage with the industry? Is it only studies, or are there other practical examples?
Well, there's always money. I mean, that's. I mean, it's not academics are not, not unmotivated by money. So there's often, we will do work on a consultancy basis, frankly, which is, I say frankly, I mean, that's not so why that should be surprising. We would do work that would be working with particular clients. It could be people working in the data industry, although as I say, that's less common, but being health and finance, where the industry has a particular objective in mind, and we would work with them in order to find the most cost-effective ways of achieving those outcomes, subject to those outcomes being ones that are considered to be good. So if I were to be approached by a tobacco company to say, could you help us sell more cigarettes, that would be something that I wouldn't do, because I don't think that's a good outcome. So it would be filtered by what we consider to be, ethically good, or what institutions, our institutions have certain, guidelines around the kinds of work that we are ethically allowed to, be involved in. And so subject to you not wanting to do anything that's actively harmful to people, there would be opportunities to consult using the principles of behavioral science to enable you to achieve your objectives more readily and more cheaply.
Thank you, Paul. I've got a couple more questions for you, but I'm going to send them to you and connect you with the askers, actually, because I know we're at.
That would be good. I'd just say one final thing, though, Mark. I think, again, just first of all, to thank everybody for their time today. I hope some of that, as I say, resonates. One of the things I just want to maybe leave a kind of insight or a lesson, and that could be picked up on in future research and or commercialization, although again those things are not always mutually exclusive, is the recognition in the last couple of decades. It kind of came to my mind when I was thinking about the journey of behavioral science over the last decade or two, of an increasing appreciation and deep understanding of the role that unconscious and automatic processes play in our behavior. So much of what we do simply comes about rather than being thought about. The old style approaches to understanding and changing behavior would be to try to change people's minds. We know that's largely useless. I mean, largely useless. There are limits to how much you can do and how much people are actually willing and able to change their minds. Changing the context or the environment within which people behave that access unconscious and automatic processes is a much more effective way to change people's behavior. So if any of you are interested in changing behavior, which I'm sure, of course, many of you are in many ways, the ways to do that, and we can obviously talk offline much more about that, are to change aspects of the context within which people act, as opposed to thinking about how you can change the cognition of their mind that comes to the environment within which they behave. I think that's, again, that's an illustration of a basic insight and understanding that we've established over the last couple of decades that is readily applicable to the dating industry, whether that be in pure research or commercial aspects or some interaction between them.
I think that's where behavioral science is quite unique, because you are bringing together psychology and economics, and these are, I think your knowledge of biases and heuristics can really inform product design and the way we encourage people to sign up and become engaged
Exactly.
and actually find what they're looking for. So it's very on topic.